I'll unmute us.
Oh, we're gonna be on?
Yeah, we have to record it, but we don't have to take minutes or action. Or anything like that, just work session tonight.
But it's like,
Yeah, if anyone wants to participate from the public, I don't see anyone online currently, but, we record them just so that we have all the public record of what's going on.
That's great. So, the first item, the extended stay, council had it for second reading, it didn't pass?
Yes, exactly. So
What the-
this is quite an
can you
interesting
tell us about that?
public hearing, for me to be a part of. There was basically, so essentially they tabled it and they've requested a joint work session between planning commission and council.
Which we had said from the beginning to do one, yeah.
So so what I'm thinking is at our November meeting, maybe we could just do,
When is the November meeting?
November meeting would be, so first Wednesday would be the 6th of November. Of course, we could, if you couldn't make it, or if folks can't make that meeting, we can also create kind of like a special work session. But I figured since we will have that scheduled, likely we'll have a regular meeting as well that night.
Yeah, I'm gonna be out of town.
Well, that sounds nice. So do we want to then either move the regular meeting date to say maybe like the 13th of November or a different day that same week and just schedule it as a special meeting? Or do we want to, because I feel like at least for the work session, joint work session item, it would be ideal to have you here. I don't know if it's,
I wanna know what the problem.
I don't know if it's critical, so we could either just make this joint work session a different day, or we could move the regular meeting as well.
Not till the 8th or 9th, and that's the weekend, so the 13th is fine with me, that's a Wednesday. Aren't you going out of town?
No, we don't
19th or
19th
something, yeah, for some reason I didn't remember that. So I'm good with the 13th, if everyone else is.
That's good for everyone right
It's
now.
just the following Wednesday,
It's probably important to try to do it
so
timely.
everybody can make it.
Right,
Was it, can you give us more information about what happened?
yeah, I wanted to just establish the date quick. So there's really there's like three items I would say that became an issue at the meeting. Okay, perfect. So the first one I think is the easiest one to address, the time frame on which it would come in which you'd have to come into compliance. We wrote the ordinance so that it would come into compliance deadline. Well, you'd have to get an application in for January 1st and then be compliant by March. And so, they felt that was, especially given how long this is kind of ended up taking, they said, well, we're not, that seems like a lot to comply with.
I think we would have agreed on that, I think we
Yeah.
kind of
It's
even.
easy.
And I definitely mentioned that in the
Yeah.
meeting, as I don't think that's as that important. Obviously, we don't want to push it out forever and ever and ever, but even if it was said, well, okay, let's make it January of 2026, give people a whole year to start working on it and be in compliance by that date, that's still achieving our goal long term. So I think it struck me from our last meeting in August that folks wouldn't have been too upset about that. The second issue that came up was about clarification on who specifically applies to, and this was quite relevant in the meeting because for example, there's a property on the west end of town on Colorado Boulevard, that it's an old hotel structure with the
And you and I talked about that.
elk in front of it, I think it is, it's like, it's not a hotel now, it hasn't been a hotel for quite a long time, but historically it was a hotel, it was built as a hotel. The rooms still are just hotel rooms, essentially, about 200 square feet or thereabouts. No kitchen facilities, most folks just plug in a microwave or a hot plate or what have you. And they just have lived like that for quite a long time.
What's their current?
But there's
legal
several like that.
situation or like?
Well, and that's the question, I think, that I didn't really have a good answer to, because in my opinion, that would qualify, because it was originally built as a hotel, and they didn't go through any processes like with a building permit or change of use to make it long-term residence. They're not apartments, they're not even, I don't know if they meet the definition of efficiency unit or something to that respect, but that kind of started off, unraveled the meeting a little bit, because folks kind of didn't know, like, well, is that gonna impact my property or my friend's property or my neighbor's property? And, you know, is it just like the clear hotels that still offer short-term stays? And yeah, and you know, it's like, I think the intent of these regulations is to get any situation where you have just a room with no kitchen facilities, to be that slightly higher level of health, safety, welfare standards and like. So if it wasn't clear in that ordinance that it should apply to everyone, I think, in my opinion, it maybe should be clear that anything that was originally approved like that should be.
I think that was our intent.
Absolutely. It seems like that type of setup is not currently operating legally.
That's what I
And
was
this
gonna
is kind of
say.
like a path towards legality for them. And so it's actually kind of it's a better option
Right.
than getting,
Just closing his
Just
business.
shut
Sorry,
down,
it's
you know?
illegal, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's.
it's not meant to be a threat or anything, but it's like, this is meant to be a helpful way to get into compliance.
Right, yeah, because it strikes me at least, and I know like a legal standpoint, because we also talked with Nick and Carmen separately. You know, they kind of fit in this weird middle ground where it's like not a hotel anymore, but it's also not meeting our definition of a dwelling unit, so it's not multifamily housing.
Yeah.
So is it an illegal use or is it an unregulated use? Is that
Good question.
kind of fair to say? And so if it's just a use that kind of fits outside the boundaries of our existing regulations, does that mean we need to modify the ordinance slightly to clearly wrangle that use as well? Because, you know, I would have thought, well, it's not a clearly allowed use, so they're operating, you know, legally, I guess, but I don't think it's quite as simple as that. Legally?
No, yeah, we have to give some more thought into,
Makes sense.
you know, what this is for these closer calls. I don't think we.
Yeah, because if,
thought of
once
that.
you start approving one, you're gonna have to do the other, because there's more than one, and
Mhm.
that one some might be good, some might be bad.
Right, yeah, and I honestly think that this is a positive to come out of that discussion, because it does potentially close the door on some potential gray area that we didn't anticipate.
Yeah, it would
See,
be
I-
nice to find out after something was enacted.
I mean, I kind of anticipated, because that's what I said, this is gonna open a can of worms for some of these people, and now, did they show up at the meeting,
Well,
property owners from the different places?
no, I guess there's one property owner who was there.
Because I would have came down for it. too. But I had, Chuck, and it was outside the meeting, so.
Obviously, so that was another thing that came out of the meeting, is council strongly wanted us to send us an official letter notifying everyone who operates
Good idea.
anything like a hotel, whether we have any evidence that they operate as extended stay currently or not, just a notification saying, hey, this is something that might impact you. We didn't do that
After the fact, or saying like, hey,
well,
it's gonna be
like
discussed at
ahead
this
of
meeting?
this November.
Oh, no, we've never done stuff.
I don't think we
like
need
that.
to do that.
Well, council
Okay.
directed us specifically that we need to send them a notice, and I think originally we had considered that and said, well, we don't wanna, you know, potentially it could open a can of worms to say, well, now anytime a specific user group is impacted, it should,
Well, then they need to do the same thing too. Not just always the planning commission doing it. Because, I mean, that can happen at any meeting. People can say, well, we weren't given notice.
right,
Well, you had the one time
Public
you by
meetings.
your property, all of a sudden
Yeah.
it's there. It's like you were never given notice, were you?
yeah, not a
Okay, thank
specific
you.
notice to a potentially impacted property,
Why
but
did they-
council asked for this particular work session, that'll be a joint work session. They want that notice sent out.
Do you know the reasoning for why? I mean, I know conceptually why, but like out of all the times that something popped up
Yeah.
over the years, why is this one triggering that impact?
Because it's gonna piss off a lot of people.
Yeah,
How many things I've done?
Well, so question, would it also be possible to send a notice to new residents that will be affected by this?
like.
Well,
folks
we don't
who
know
are
who they
living
are.
in
We know
facilities.
their address and their room numbers.
Well, I don't know who lives in what places.
No, but we know their address and room numbers. I mean, here's the thing, it seems to me like this is designed to create a public stir. To get people that they know will be upset about it. In here, so that they can say, well, look, there was so much public comment against it. And so if we can't say that we shouldn't do this because it's a bad idea, then perhaps we should say, we should also bring in the people who will be positively affected by this.
I would agree with that. I do agree also that it could be, other than maybe delivering them specifically to doors.
Yeah.
It may be practically difficult to deliver that. But I think,
And I say it's very unfair to bring one side of in, one side that they know is gonna be against it in. And not bring in anyone who might be for it.
Well, part of the problem is some of them operate as hotels during the summer and extended stay in the winter and vice versa. So
That's fair
you're
enough.
not gonna hit people that are living there.
I mean, but regardless, if it's a positive or negative, whatever, I mean, we have never done this, like.
It can't be
That's
done
my first
fairly,
question.
maybe we shouldn't do it, but
Why?
maybe we don't have a say.
I mean, I
Special
don't care if
treatment?
we
Like, what's
send a
up with
letter to the, I think sending it to the property owners, I'm fine with that, but it's just kind of like, okay.
that? If you do it now, do it every time.
Well, yeah, it's like, okay,
You're right.
Yeah,
we
that's a good
post the
point.
public meeting, it's like everything. I mean, it's where do you, to me, it's kind of precedent setting that, okay, I'd be one of those people if I didn't like something and it came down the pipe, well, wait a minute, you didn't send out the notice,
Yeah.
so. That's up to them if they want to open that door.
right, I know in some cases it's much harder to identify a specific party that could be impacted. In this case, it's very easy to identify, the, let's say, dozen
Right.
folks who might be impacted by this
So
ordinance.
giving them a notice, what does that do for them then? Give them the opportunity to come to the second reading?
Well,
To the work session.
yeah, they said, hey, if you
On
want,
the 13th.
that was the direction was to, draft a letter, kind of notifying them, saying, hey, here's this joint work session coming up,
That's
here's the
okay.
topic under consideration, we realize this. We recognize that, as a hotel motel operator, you may not be impacted because you just rent for nightly rentals, but, there's an off chance since you operate in this way that you could be impacted, and so we are sending you this friendly notice now. And I mean, it gets to kind of I think Kent, your question is good. How do we also reach out to folks who probably aren't, folks who might be living in a place
Yeah.
longer than 30 days that, is not necessarily like clearly established by a license or something like that.
And even then, I mean, I feel like it would be kind of hard. If I was in that situation, I feel weird coming and trying to defend that when the owner is trying to
That's
go
a good
against
point.
it and am I kicked out or what?
And there just seem to be a lot of problems with this idea.
Yeah.
That's all I'm
I
saying.
mean, I think in principle, I'm not against letting people know don't be then. I'm always like, let's make a higher effort to get people here to hear what they think, but I feel like it's a big can of worms. Like if you're gonna do this for this time, I feel like you have to do it for everything and change the rules, however it is,
Right.
And how do
like,
you define who's affected? I mean, it seems very difficult. I don't know, do we have any, we have some ability to push back, I guess, but it's their decision. But like you said, how do you even decide who's gonna be affected? It's
Right.
easy to send it to business owners, and in that case, we'll just always be sending business owners stuff, which
Right,
means they get an outsized voice when they already have an outsized voice. Just
Oh.
saying.
What, I guess my thought is, why, to me, the public meeting, because the decision-making is going to council, why didn't they want to send it out before the first public reading to get the input? Why wasn't it a public notice for a public hearing on their side? We've had the
well,
public
and
hearings
there
and
was,
stuff.
public notice occurred
Mhm.
as is required per code, you know, the ordinance was posted on the correct dates, the meetings were posted with agendas, with packets and all of this, in all the ways that you're supposed to do so.
Right.
Code amendments don't require you to send anything out to like a radius of people or a subset of people, whereas, you know, like when we reviewed the CUP, you obviously have to send it to folks within 300 feet, so it's clear who is potentially affected.
I guess why does the normal rules not apply? Is the question that I have. Like, why do all the normal postings, why is that not good enough for this particular issue?
I mean, that's.
I know, you kind of answer that because y'all didn't make that decision.
Yeah, I don't exactly, like, it's really like something where if you're super unhappy about it, I'd say go to the next council meeting and complain.
Is that something that you consider advising them on? Like, do you consider this actually it's
There's no reason why they can't do this, you know? There's
Of
no-
course.
Right, I mean,
This is what they wanna do.
ahead of.
even though it's not a normal thing?
I think it's
Yeah,
fine, let them come to
yeah.
the work session.
I mean, in some ways, it'll head off some of the issues that are gonna pop up anyways.
Sure.
Just curious as to why,
Yeah.
to Cindy's point, why hasn't it happened before now? Right, when we're already on second
Yeah.
reading, like,
On
But-
that,
I don't know, I mean, let them come
the
and speak their
final-
mind.
The other issue that came up in the meeting, that's for a couple of members in particular and not some others, was about the potential cost to bring it into compliance for those business owners who may have been operating this way for a long time. And that kind of brings the question of, well, where will there be, you know, bringing it back to sending a notice out, there's a lot of operators who it probably would cost them almost nothing to come into compliance. It's like an additional application form and putting together some floor plans and things like that ahead of renewal. Because a lot of the places do have kind of communal kitchen spaces that could either be retrofitted or already being used as such. It would be the folks who don't have any common area facilities like that who would have to get building permits to do so.
From what I understand, yeah, and we talked about that too, saying how long could the compliance, remember, because I was worried about electrical if somebody had to
Right.
do something, which is very easily, quickly done. It sounded like, but, you know, one of the places took one of their rooms and made the communal out of that. If they
Right.
gotta give up.
I mean, the
Yeah,
dates, you
room.
know, we set those quite a while ago, things have
Right.
lingered, and so that
And
makes
I think
total
the
sense
dates
to move the dates back.
And I did mention, which we talked about before, is even if someone applied by the date, you know, putting in an application in 2 months is not that difficult, but if they said, well, it's gonna be a few months beyond that for me to actually get the building permits because we're delayed with the contractor,
Yeah.
we're not going to kick people out of their spaces. We're just going to make sure that you're continuing to work with us and you're not just blowing us off, which would cause us to
Is that
enforce.
their concern was that we would have to basically not, in this term, but like evict people because they're not compliant, so why were they? I thought the whole point of this was to make sure these places are operating at a certain standard, which
Yes.
if you're not, then yeah,
Yes.
it's gonna cost you some money.
Or you could
But are they
decide not to
concerned
do
from
it.
the business owner, or are they concerned from the tenant's side?
Well,
Well,
question about that, oh, I'm sorry, answer first. I'll wait,
yeah,
I'm
I
sorry.
think the concern that was raised was specifically about cost to the operator and because potentially the operator would not want to pay that cost, that means that X number of people have now lost the place that they've lived for a long period of time. And, you know, and then that's, you know, potentially in their eyes would be the city's fault, even though really, you know, if you're not complying with minimum standards for, you know, generally it's probably a communal
So if the
kitchen
place
space.
burns down and
Right,
something horrible happens,
Yeah.
then everybody chose to ignore it? Is
No,
that
it's like-
better?
it's
I don't
not.
know.
It's not, and if we want to bring up the minimum standards and create a path to legality for these currently questionably illegal businesses, if they don't want to comply, then that's your choice, you
right.
know, feel free to just be a normal hotel.
Yeah,
You know-
maybe we just actually make them pay a fee for, you know,
If,
working illegally for so long.
if you're upset that you're not allowed to be a slumlord anymore, I don't have a lot of sympathy for you, is my thought.
Mhm.
All right, so I think we agree sending them the letters fine. Are you comfortable with doing that?
Well, that's
I
the
don't think that that's
direction.
true. So we
So
agree.
you have to go with it.
What,
Is it possible to say that there were at least members that thought it was a very bad idea because it sets a bad precedent?
I think in the
Just
work
we've got it
session.
noted here.
Yeah.
I don't know, we can talk about it in the
Well,
work
I
session.
disagree
with sending it too, so.
Dylan's fine to tell, the mayor
no, and
that.
I'm happy to talk to the mayor.
So I mean, it doesn't have to make a big stink or anything, but just noted that you just think it's a bad idea, because it sets a bad precedent. And you can't probably reach out to all the people affected. Because you're right, there's no real good way to get to the residents who are the people who will be mostly affected. I'm sorry if it affects these rich people's pocketbooks, but we're talking about people's living spaces, will affect them a lot more.
Yeah, I think that is a good point about the residents who may also be impacted if it passes or doesn't pass, because figuring out a way to do that in addition to sending it to a property owner would be the equitable thing to do, I think.
Why is it so? The procedure isn't that difficult. Well, we can talk about that in the work session, but the procedure is not, if we're a hotel and they want to operate as apartments, what guidelines do they follow? That's something that believe me, they know it.
This is pretty minimal compared to,
Right,
Some of the
yeah,
stuff
if
we
you
talked
wanted
about,
to
so.
convert it officially to apartments, you'd have to put in a kitchen in each unit, there'd have to be potentially different building code standards, you'd have to bring yourself into compliance for, especially for buildings that were built a long time ago, because building code has changed and we're going from a commercial to residential, it has different building code implications, so this is definitely a less rigorous and expensive way of having a, kind of compliant long-term rental in the city, that kind of bridges the gap between those
But
two.
they are utilizing it as apartments.
I mean, effectively, this is a way, this is just what you said, it's a path to, towards some sort of compliance without having to rebuild the entire building as apartments. That's a big deal, we get that.
Okay, well, I think that's good direction. I'll shoot for November 13th. And I would mention, I guess, for all of you, since we'll have this joint session with them, I think the key thing to consider is where, it seems clear to me that everyone is still in favor of requiring like a communal kitchen with a permanent, cook stove, and you're okay with changing the compliance timeline to extend it and give people more time. Is that fair to say? And I'll talk to the mayor and we'll see what the best protocol will be for getting out a special notice. I do think if there's a way, I'm happy to do this generally, if there's a way for future potential code amendments that I can notify more people, I'm happy to do that, because I think a knowledgeable and well-informed community is a better community, and then people are less angry when it gets passed and they didn't know about it. But practically, it's difficult.
More engagement is good, but you just want to make sure that you're not accidentally or purposely targeting a specific subset of people who will be affected, which does seem to be what's happening here, accidentally or purposely, but it's certainly targeting just one subset. And that is a problem. More informed people, more community engagement, that's wonderful. That's a great thing. Beg people to watch these meetings or come to them.
Yeah, the other thing that was mentioned that I didn't really think about much, it was about whether we surveyed residents of these spaces ahead of time to see if it's something they actually want. And I think the practical ability to do that would have been quite difficult too, since
I've
it's
talked to
currently
people.
an unregulated,
Surveyed who?
folks who are living in a, let's say, a hotel long-term, getting out some sort of survey to see whether they were interested in these increased standards. But I think that's quite difficult when it's not a regulated thing at the moment and you don't really know who is where.
Also not just about the current people living there, it's
Right.
about the longevity of the city itself and these. the
Why-
standards of the
I
places
guess
they're
my
in.
thought is they asked us to do this.
Yeah.
Why didn't they think of sending out a survey to see if planning commission should move forward?
It was so long ago, there were
I
different
know.
council members.
Yeah,
That's true,
I do
too.
think that
That's
is
true,
also
too.
part of it.
And I did last summer, so 2023, I just walked around and knocked on doors and introduced myself and asked people. And I met a lot of people like, I'm here for the weekend, man. But I met a couple folks that were there that had kids that lived there with family of 3 and 4 in a couple of units. And they were, I mean, it almost seems silly to say it, but in my very informal survey of asking them, would you be interested in requirements saying that like, you know, these type of things, that you need to be, you need to be required to have a kitchen and other amenities. They're like, yeah, we would prefer to not have to go to McDonald's every night,
Right.
you know? So I mean, that's my very informal survey, of course, it was a year ago now. Yeah,
And I would say largely, I think council did recognize the issue that is
Yeah.
being addressed. I don't think they were saying this is not something that we should be working on. I think that there was just those couple of issues that were brought up that they wanted
I'm
to
gonna go back.
pay some more attention.
you should, you really should.
Did you listen to it?
I have a question. Aren't we also at the same time tackling the fact that these hotels are working illegally and we're providing a path to compliance? So it's not just like, oh, would these people like it or not? It's like, dude, you're signing contracts that you're not allowed to be signing right now.
Right. I would agree with that because our hotel definition clearly only allows 30 days or less. And so, this is another way, it's an incentive in some ways to say, well, all right, you can keep doing what you're doing. You just need to kind of
These
jump
minimums.
Help you
through a
make
few
it
hoops
legal,
to do it, to legalize it, because, you know, I think it would have been easier maybe or more palatable as well to folks if we had just cracked down on it years ago as a city and said, I don't know, you know.
That's life. I mean, you know, you leave an issue kind of starts and maybe it was pretty small at the beginning. It's become a relatively common thing. And probably should have, like you said, addressed it years ago. We started talking about it years ago.
Right.
But it's always gonna be a little painful when you're addressing a problem that really is, you should have addressed years ago. That's just how it works in life. And so that makes sense. So let's, the joint session makes a lot of sense from that perspective.
Yeah.
You know, talk to them, get on the same page, and not be adversarial or anything.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm curious, who was the owner that showed up for
Well, it's a member of council.
the?
Really? Isn't that a conflict of interest?
Well, so
What?
it's a legislative decision rather than a quasi judicial, so you can have any.
Yeah,
It's
not, you know, this isn't targeted at him specifically, it's just targeted at the whole city in theory,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, so
So
that
he's-
saying, that wouldn't be a conflict of interest, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because
Yeah.
it's not like, you know, it's not particular to him.
So what would it have to be a law that says this specific hotel or name the person? Like when is it? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, well, you know, we see it most in like, if it was a land use application, right? If it was something that would maybe, give his hotel directly a benefit.
I thought it if you had financial also.
Well, he does, I mean, it
I
does,
know.
the cost of redoing, current, complaints about, well, I have to kick everybody out, that's loss of revenue. It does affect his current financial situation.
Yeah, but it,
But
In
that's why they
future.
should excuse themselves.
It would be more
Recuse
so
themselves
like,
because they have a financial interest.
All I
They
can
have
do,
to choose to recuse themselves, right? We can tell them, hey, dude. Not cool.
not on that, something like that. It would be like if he, if like a neighboring hotel put an application in for something,
Mhm.
and that application like gave the council member extra land, or,
Interesting.
you know, he had a construction contract that would be executed if this land use application went
Oh,
through.
like previous things that have happened in town.
It's like, you know, like an actual like direct benefit that's on the line.
This is a little indirect, is the
Would
problem.
it be similar, let's say that if let's say like someone's neighbor submitted like a CUP for something that could impact the neighbors and one of the council members happened to be that neighbor and there was gonna be a noise, like a crushing operation, I don't know. Could they vote on that and say, well, I don't want it, even because I think the conflict of interest would be, well, I live right next to it, so it could impact me negatively, or are you letting?
I think
putting
they'd
on
be
the spot
fine to
about
do
that.
that, well, yeah.
Interesting.
As long as you're voting based on the criteria in that case.
It's just a little different because we don't have a home rule charter that has its own ethics code. So it's really just the states, and the states is very, specific on, you know, what constitutes a conflict of interest.
And you're going based on that, out of that.
Yeah,
Well, and Carmen mentioned it was maybe slightly different for legislative decision versus quasi judicial.
Yeah.
Because legislative is not based on this like clear set of criteria.
legislative is just, and also just a blanket, you know, that's just what it is, right? It's not an individual decision-making on a specific item.
Right.
I would say from the sound of the direction this will end up going is we should probably come up with another alternative of what those businesses could be. I mean, I think we're talking two where they don't need hotel, motel, but they're not needing in apartments, but they still will have to apply, change their business, whatever it is, but they're called this now and come up with a definition.
Well, I'm gonna give some thought to it,
Okay.
because I'm sure on the 13th, there's gonna be a lot of different questions.
Yeah. That's why I'm saying it is kind of tough prep for it to think that, okay, we can move those over to that. But part of us wanting to do this was to fix some of that up too.
Yeah, I don't see how that fixes any of
It
the
doesn't.
issues. It just, the more we go through the whole process, if the people that are doing what they're not supposed to be doing, not just with a different name, it's covering, you know, it's like,
Right. I think
Yeah.
if we can define it so that those folks, whatever you call them, also fit within
Yeah.
this ordinance, because ultimately it's protecting the people who are living in these spaces who maybe don't have another option.
And we are tackling the places that are doing it seasonally by doing this, at least, and the city's aware of what businesses are doing it and not, because they'll have to come in and get that extended stay part of it. So at least the city's aware of it, because right now, unless it's just hearsay as to how anybody's aware of it.
I mean, the residents are gonna be impacted no matter what, because if people have to pay to update things, they're probably gonna increase rent or anything that they're staying, right?
100%.
So like,
100%.
unfortunately, they are the ones.
Right,
that are gonna be-
but, yeah, like, what are the protections for residents? So say someone says, I don't want any of this, I'll sell the property and shut down everyone gets it.
Or just be a normal hotel.
Right, you have to leave, what are the protections, can you kick them out like in 30 days, does the city have to say in that?
Well, it probably depends on how the leases and agreements operate. I think a lot of folks operate with like a 30-day lease, and if that's the case, other than the city coming in and providing some sort of
Right.
subsidy or something to those folks who are displaced, there wouldn't be I don't know if a tenant,
I'm not sure they even have a legal contract right now.
Some of them.
yeah, so I guess if eviction law could, I mean, that's more complicated than what I can certainly get into.
Right,
off the
it's
top
like,
of my head,
how many
but-
businesses do we expect to go through a remodel phase to get up the code and then let them move out?
And a lot of them,
How many
said they're already doing it.
Right,
Right.
and that could maybe be a potential benefit of getting some of those folks to the table, is to say, well, how difficult, like how much work is actually needed? And they might say, well, I already have this space, you'd say, fantastic, then like, won't have to displace anyone.
I mean, it's seriously like,
It's very minimal,
No,
the only
it's so
thing
nice.
really is finding a space where you can run a 220 volts for a stove, because everything else that's required, you would just plug into a normal outlet, and I guess put in a sink, which would be a minor amount of plumbing if you don't have that.
I can think, it's not hard.
Yeah, no,
Like,
that's
it's,
Yeah.
you know, here's the thing, at the end of the day, this is very minimal requirements. A lot of people are already doing it. You're required to do certain things as a business. It's just how it works. I've got an alcohol business. There's all kinds of laws for it, you know?
Right.
And it's, I can't do certain things. I'm not allowed to sell hard liquor just because of the type of license we have. That's how it is. We're required to have certain things in place. This is very normal. And I'm sorry if you're unregulated business, whether it's illegal or not, it sure as heck has been unregulated. I'm sorry if your unregulated business is suddenly getting some very minimal regulations. You might have to deal with, you know. That's my position.
I have a question probably for Nick, and this might sound kind of evil, okay, but help me think
Don't
about
forget
this.
you're on tape.
Just wonder if we are worried that people are gonna be saying, oh, then we're gonna have homeless people, because we're just gonna kick them out. Could we, I'm not suggesting this is the way to go or that this is what I like, but I thought it could. You either can opt to be conform and do the work. And if not, then you have to pay, how do you call those?
Like if you live,
Not a fee, like a, oh my gosh, how do my brain just leave me? Let me, blah, blah, blah. When you do something wrong and you have to pay for it,
fine.
a fine, thank you. And it's like, okay, if you don't something, you're gonna have to pay a fine for the time that you have been doing this illegal. Question,
gonna
I'm
end
throwing it
up-
out there, not trying to, that's the way
You
to go.
could do it because you can't make a
Draw.
law and then fine someone for doing something that was.
Even if it's to
Yeah.
try to keep people off the street and that's what,
No, yeah, like
you can't.
Like if drunk driving was not illegal and then it was made illegal tomorrow. And you drunk drive last week, you couldn't get, convicted for drunk driving last week.
But you're talking about continuing behavior, and if they continue afterwards, but that just goes to the.
No, I was thinking just
Oh.
to kind of motivate them more to like, don't just.
No, I mean, I think that the motivation, the stick part, the carrot is we're giving you a path towards legality. The
Yeah.
stick part is you would lose your business license. That's in section G.
Yeah.
You know,
Sure, there's something in there.
Okay,
It's not legal.
Okay, okay, so I'll plan that tentatively and I'll confirm with council for November 13th. And then I'll also go through the process just of making sure that we schedule the regular meeting as November 13th. That way sounds like everyone tentatively can attend that, and so that will be good.
It's gotta probably just be a little longer meeting.
Yeah, what I'm anticipating for that is we'll start with the work session maybe at 6 and just set it for, let's say, an hour. Or something kind of to say, here's a structured period of time because we have to get to regular meeting. And we'll just set regular meeting for 7 or 7:30. I don't know if we'll have a lot on there. It might be a couple of items, it might just be one item, I'm not sure. So it might be a short regular meeting anyway, but yeah, I think we try to set a strict parameter so it doesn't just, because I can see it going all night if
That's
they
what-
wanted
that's what
to.
it's-
and then if
Yeah.
there is an agenda at the work session, it might help. If you're like, well, there's 4 items, so that means 15 minutes each or something.
Mhm.
Cindy.
hey, a work session, Dylan's in charge.
Oh, never mind, Dylan then.
I think in the past we have also moved the time, like, right, to be earlier. If we had something longer.
Well, council meetings, work session often starts at 5:30, but I don't know if, I know some folks have, jobs and things like that, that you wouldn't be able to get here by 5:30, so.
I can do 5:30, because we went back to our 8-hour days, but that's, Katie might be tougher. It's on a Wednesday.
I can do it, I pick on it now.
I'm fine with 5:30 then,
Same.
Okay. So
and then
we'll say-
5:30 to 6:30 the work session, and then the meeting starts at 6:30 still. Yeah.
And then, yeah, we would be getting out hopefully at a pretty normal hour.
5:30, 6:30.
Okay, I'll plan for that, and, yeah, council seemed like they were happy to, do it on Wednesday or on a Monday when they don't have other meetings, but right now with all the budget work session meetings going on, I think there's not a lot of Mondays that they won't be meeting, so it might be nice to set it for that Wednesday. Okay, perfect. And I'm happy to chat more about, this, if anyone wants, I'm around, so, if you wanna game plan or anything, or talk through any questions, just let me know. Okay, so next item I just put as like a general update thing, and I was gonna talk about this one either way, but I was expecting it to be approved, so that was one item off my list. We've addressed this, that extends state lodging in a much greater detail. So I think the only real update I have is just about some ongoing projects, like the mountain bike trails are now open. You probably, if you've gone on the east end of town, there's a lot of bikes around town and people parking on Colorado Boulevard, which is kind of nice to see. I haven't gotten any major complaints yet, but I haven't seen anyone parking in the neighborhoods, but I don't know, maybe if you've seen folks.
I did notice the signs that were put up. That was nice. I mean, those popped up that says, you know, you can't park here for, you can park right now, but.
Right, yep.
Yeah, no, we haven't seen anybody that on Riverside there at least, parking and walking back that way. I think there was a couple occasions, like maybe a month ago or something like that, we saw some people that were out of towners that are parking there, but lately, you know, it's been.
Yeah, well, and we also now have officially made that area resident parking only. From like, the Gilson Street Bridge
Right.
east.
Oh, good.
So we officially signed that, within the last month or so.
Yeah. it was
And
nice.
so, you know, if you talk to folks who live down there, and I don't know if like, some people aren't registered with like the resident parking system. And, you know, someone might, I don't think they're really patrolling that area unless they're getting a complaint. But, just a friendly note, if anyone's listening, or, you know, you talk to anyone who lives down there, you can register for free your vehicles, as many as you have, and if you have guests who come in town, you register them as well, and they can park in resident parking areas. It would just be for folks who are here for the day, who wouldn't be able to park down there.
Did they change in front of the park to 3 hour?
For CRC Park, yeah, that's signed as 3 hour at the moment.
Cause
It
you see a
also,
lot parked there.
we
so.
did put up temporary signage, those same
I
signs
saw
that
that, yeah.
Jefferson mentioned saying, don't park here.
Yeah.
But I definitely still seen some people unloading their bikes. I haven't seen any major conflict where it's been totally parked yet, but we might have to get Park Idaho Springs folks
Yeah.
to start. I mean, it's hard to enforce. I think like 90% of it is just hoping that people follow posted signs. The other one is the visitor center is getting a lot more traffic.
The post office too. I
And
watched
probably
guys
safer.
unload their
Yeah.
cars there.
Interesting,
Yeah.
so.
Just
so
unload
then-
though, I haven't seen anybody park, like I see them unload and then drive away.
Oh, no, I saw
So
the
I
park
think
there.
so.
The guy got on his bike and
Huh.
took off. But there's no signage that says you can't,
Right.
so I thought, I'm not gonna say anything,
Right.
but
Well,
no, he
One
wasn't doing anything
concern,
wrong.
a concern that council had was some of the businesses on the east end who don't have any off-street parking. Marion's would be an example of one where technically all of the spaces in front of Marion's are owned by the city.
Yeah.
It's in city right of way. So we had some like business only signs printed. We haven't distributed any of those, but council was open to providing those to private businesses if they had issues with folks being able to access. It kind of came up because there was a big running race in the summer that basically the entire east end had no parking available, and none of the businesses, you know, had any sales that day essentially. And so I think there's a balance between it's a public resource and the public, regardless of use, should be able to use, and kind of protecting businesses that are been there for quite a long time and always relied on city parking.
If you look at Coma's website, I think they did a very good job, and they said, please be respectful of the residential areas. Idaho Springs is a smaller town, there isn't a lot of parking. And I thought that was cool that they put that in there and
Yeah.
pointed out. to people
Thanks
to
for
try to-
mentioning that, I saw that too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
to
they did a good
look
job.
at that.
Well, we're definitely pushing, and the city website is trying to also push people to the correct places to park, just to say, listen, we don't want conflicts. But let's also have a little patience for folks, because
I think people are so excited right now, they're all coming. It's the newest place
So
to
many
go.
of them.
Yeah.
I've noticed a
It's kinda
few
cool to see.
mountain bikers going on Colorado Boulevard, west to east, so I assume they were going there. So
Right.
I assume they're parking that way,
yeah,
which is cool.
yeah, you know, I was unsure how many people would be willing to pay for parking to then ride over. But I guess if you were gonna stop like for a beer after anyway, you might as well just be
They've
central.
been having great events, right, in the park as well as at Yard's Pep House, that movie night that they had, like there's just a lot of people coming in for these things. It's great.
I think if anyone notices any major issues occurring, let us know. Also, if there's anyone, there's a few businesses who have done like promotions for people who come in with their bike. Like I know Tommy Knocker is doing like a free beer with a purchase of food or something, so I know we have a new business promotions board that's been established, which also I guess is an update.
On the city's website?
It's just, so the city, actually in the since we last met, has now officially approved 2 new official commissions. One is for our sites and facilities, which was a long-standing, kind of volunteer committee that was kind of a joint between the Historical Society and the city. But now it's officially under the city's umbrella, and we appointed 5 members of that. But they also kind of evolved the Vitality Task Force that had been meeting since COVID started into an official board under the city's umbrella as well. It's called like the Business Promotions and.
And they don't have the chamber then anymore.
Yeah, they kind of, Sadie, who owns the Spice and Tea Exchange, she's serving as the like interim director of that board. She said that she kind of is taking the chamber and putting it on a shelf, and they use it still as like a nonprofit when you need like a liquor license or a special event permit or something like that. So,
Are those two gonna be tied in some way? Or no?
no, like the chamber and
Like
the
chamber
business
and-
promotions. Well, not officially, like the chamber will still kind of just be the nonprofit organization, whereas the
On page 5, where you changed area 1 and 7 to 6. R is still correct. It's talking about boundaries. This is,
Oh, I see.
I mean, it's such a tiny thing, I just happened to notice.
Oh, sure. Yeah, right.
Yes.
Good job, though, this is a bunch of work, retyping all this stuff.
Well, no, I think it's good to, it's definitely good to have up to date. I don't know where this map went, but I'm really hoping I find it, the updated version, because that was what took me the most time. So. Okay, so other than obviously the map being an issue and those couple of changes, would we otherwise be comfortable, bringing this back as an action item, or do you want to see the updated?
I think do it as an action item. Get it done.
Absolutely.
Gets it off the table for you. Are you guys fine with that? You can make the corrections.
Yeah, I have a question though, I don't know if I'm understanding it wrong, or maybe there's something that I am missing that I don't know. But area 1 in summary says there is a low moderate potential for erosion for much of the lands in area 1, except for those areas that abut the city, the current city limits. That area will be difficult to serve. And I was thinking that if they abut means that they're next to it, right?
Right.
So I thought that if they are next to it, wouldn't that actually make it where it's easier? Like I thought it about me, that's the opposite, but maybe I'm just missing, I mean, there's like a whole mountain
It
right there,
happens to
and
be
then
really
like,
mountainous.
not a thing.
Yeah, I think, that area would include like going up Virginia Canyon Road and going up like the Central City Parkway in that area, so it is relatively mountainous, which makes it tougher for, let's say well, we had an example of someone who said, well, hey, I want to do a cabin, like a wedding venue at the top of Virginia Canyon Road. Like this came to council as like a work session item a couple of months ago. They were like, would you consider letting us annex? But from a practical standpoint, it would basically be taking over maintenance of the entirety of Virginia Canyon Road and then potentially paving that road and then, doing the zoning to like a planned development so that they wouldn't have to run water lines and sewer lines. And so there's some potential there's certainly a way to do it anywhere within this 3 mile area, but
Yeah, no, I get it, that makes total sense.
I think it could be tougher than.
Yeah,
yeah,
no, I get it, I just thought it might
that's-
have been a typo, so I just want to make sure, but that makes sense. That's all I got.
Perfect, all right, that's fantastic.
And I think the top of White Hill was commercial and residential. I don't know if it has to just specifically say, but
Right.
wasn't it, whose property is that? He was on. Anyway, I know what that's down. I keep thinking Elm, yes, isn't it Elm Green? Yeah.
Well, there was an elevator with the school.
Yep, okay, so I think,
Down on the
Yep.
board.
yep, so I think that was part of it. Okay, what else do we have? Housing code amendments.
Okay, so, this could theoretically, I guess, have the potential to be a long discussion, but I was hoping for today that this would just be a brief starter discussion, I guess. So I've heard from several council members and several, planning commission members that with all of the development going on in the area right now, with like the community meeting for the Carlson Elementary redevelopment, with the 4 Points development at the old football field. That's bringing in a lot of housing, but not necessarily a lot of like workforce specific or affordable housing, that we should look into ways to expand like incentive programs or regulations that would require more workforce housing to be built when possible and where appropriate. And so I just wanted to kind of present in this memo a few potential ways of doing so. And kind of establish and introduce some concepts that are going on in places like Denver, or Summit County, or Boulder, or other places that aren't quite as wealthy as those places, I guess, as well. But those are like the examples that are most notable, I suppose, going on, and places where affordable housing is incredible difficulty because of demand and all of that. So one thing I didn't mention in these, was we kind of already have one item in our code, which I did not put into this packet, but we actually already have in the code in section 21-77, an inclusionary housing section that was added in 2019 that essentially says that as part of any residential project, the city may require a certain percentage of affordable units to be set aside or establish fees in lieu thereof. And those requirements could be set aside or set by the city council and implemented with like a development impact fee schedule. As far as I know, we've not set that up at all, but that kind of gets to this topic of inclusionary zoning and requiring a housing developer or potentially even a commercial developer to provide, let's say if you are doing 119 housing units as a relevant example, maybe 10% of those or 20% of those have to be at a certain rate or lower, like an AMI rate, and or only rent it to someone in the workforce or anything like that. Because as it stands now, since we don't require it, but we have the potential to do so, someone could come in and say, hey, I'm just gonna redevelop Carlson Elementary, 100 housing units in a hotel or something, all market rate, ultra luxury, rented at $5,000 a month. They might not get that in the market, but you could do something like that. And so the idea of like inclusionary zoning would be, no, okay, you can do your super ultra luxury apartments, but you also have to provide some amount of housing that's at this much lower rate that goes to locals.
Isn't that what was done at 4 Points, that so much of it goes to the school district for the teachers, but it's not based on the dollars because you don't know what the rent's gonna be. So this is kind of the same thing, but it's based on whatever that formula is,
Right,
Which-
and like an area median income
Yep.
calculation, and the school district negotiated those units at the Gold Digger Field Development.
Yeah.
As part of the sale of that property, it wasn't part of like a city requirement, but the school district negotiated that, and I believe they even negotiated the price of those
I don't
or
remember.
something to that
I know
effect,
there's
where it was limited to this very low number and so like, they did that just through their private negotiations, but we didn't require anything specifically as part of that development, though, it was framed as providing more housing that's of a type and size that may be more affordable to residents, but they never said this is workforce housing or this is affordable housing or anything like that. It's so, it's gets you to thinking, well, should we have required them to provide a certain amount or pay a fee in lieu that requires you to, where you could say, well, I don't want to build any of that, but here's
Some amount.
$100,000 per unit or something instead.
But
that
then
goes
when you
into,
do
like,
it
a
that
housing
way,
fund.
that money's goes to the city to build affordable housing.
Right.
There's no place to build it. The
Right.
city doesn't
Or
own
for
anything.
incentives.
Or
Well,
for instance, there's programs to do
Has a
that,
city
it doesn't have to be
incentive
just.
program too.
I do think that if there was a fee in lieu option, because the state law does say that you have to provide an alternative to actually building
Right.
units. We've had a lot of talk about this multi-jurisdictional housing authority, and I think that will get over the finish line in the relatively near future. There's still things to work out on it, but I'm hopeful that that will happen. We could, because we're part of this multi-jurisdictional housing authority, we could use those funds for a fee in lieu and put that into their ability to build housing with restrictions and things like that. And maybe it would be built in Clear Creek County or something, but it would benefit that, maybe it says certain number of these units being built in Clear Creek County have to be to people who work in Idaho Springs or something like that. So there's potentially ways of building that.
Who manages that type of programs? Like any of these?
The multi-jurisdictional.
No, like
Like
the
an
deed
inclusion.
restriction, I mean, who? And the others, how do
Usually
you?
it's the housing authority that administers the enforcement.
The program, the state program.
Well, it'd be like
No,
a
like-
local.
Yeah, like if we had this
Yeah.
inclusionary zoning and you had to have deed restrictions on X number of units, in those deed restrictions, it would say something along the lines of the housing agency as defined as the Clear Creek Housing Authority is the housing agency that
But we
retains
don't have
enforcement
any of
rights.
that.
They're working on it.
You don't,
No, but we
Well,
don't.
No,
have
but we
it.
also don't have a separate, there's a lot of things we don't have a separate thing of, the city council just like puts their hat on during that part of the meeting.
Well, and I will,
without that, it would be the city.
yeah, and I will say
That's
like
what I-
Summit County.
That's what I'm-
Since I've experienced there.
Right, it's
They
in
have a
Iowa,
housing
people do
department that staff, it's not like a separate housing authority, it's staff, well, a group of people, but they essentially require for, they have a few different deed restriction programs, let's say for ADUs, they require an accessory dwelling unit to be rented to an employee of a business in the county. They don't let it sit vacant or be used as a guest house. We don't have that requirement, but they do require if you build an ADU, it has to be deed restricted and it has to be rented to a local. And so they have a member of staff who each year sends out like a questionnaire that says, okay, hey, it's this time of year again, you have to submit your proof of renter and their like a pay stub and you know, to show that you're still renting it according to the regulations, and if they're not, then it becomes an issue of enforcement, but up there, they had like 300 ADUs, for example, you know, if we were to institute a program like this, depending on how many units there are, it's probably something that would fall on me in the interim unless we have the housing authority set up and that's part of their scope.
Because they've got a great program over there. We've got a few of our guys that have been able to buy over there.
Yeah.
Because of, it's deed restricted, you get it at this, but then when you sell it, you don't get to sell it and make a fortune off
You
of
just
it,
flip
like
it.
like everybody
Right,
there
yeah,
tries to do.
that's,
So, yeah, it's a great program for people, but like I said, we're a long ways from there.
mhm.
a long
Well,
ways
it's because they have a similar program, which I touched on here about where, and this is where funding comes into play that we probably don't have at this moment, certainly, but town of Breckenridge and this county up there will, like, if I were to come in and say, hey, I work for the county,
Right.
I wanna buy this house that's $1 million, but I can't afford this house that's $1 million. They would say, okay, well, we'll give you 15% of the value of that house. As long as you're willing to sign this deed restriction that says that for perpetuity now, only somebody who lives and works for a county business can live in this house. And so some other deed restrictions say, well, you can only appreciate at a certain amount each year. Those are typically owned by like the county or town of Breckenridge or town of Frisco or town of Denver. And they say, well, we'll sell this to you for half of market rate or something, but every year you can't appreciate any more than 3%. So you might only live there 20 years and then you sell it for, you know, $50,000 more than you bought it for because it's capped at that appreciation.
Right.
And so that would be like an incentive program that the city could do, but it would be, you know, incredibly costly if you said, we'll give you 10% for down payment. The average home price in Clear Creek County now is probably $500,000 or more. So, you know, that's 50,000 plus per home.
Well, if it's into, you were asking, if we do if the city did a fee in lieu for like affordable housing or something, it's not like we can build more affordable housing, but we do things like that.
Right.
That's
Just
true.
for this part of it.
You know?
Yeah, that's true. It could
Right
go
now,
directly
which
into
one
that program.
do you think is the best option? I agree that we need to do something, and I know after going to the meeting at the high school or
Mhm.
what's it called?
Carlson, Bill Carlson.
Yeah.
The future gas station, so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they were pretty adamant about it not being a gas station, that's for sure. That putting some things in place, I think is what we need to do. I just don't know which is the right one. I mean, what
Right.
is for something like, let's use that as the example.
To me, it seems like the last one is the one that it could happen easily in our geography.
No, where the
Only
city
land.
gives the money to.
No,
No,
ADU.
the ADUs where people that have space in their houses can build either like upgrade stuff or build an ADU. It's not like building a house or buying a house.
Then how do you control them not becoming a short-term rental? Was my
Right.
question on those.
You
It's
can
like,
wait
okay,
until-
that's
Yeah.
opening.
Well, and that
Another
might
can of
be
worms.
the way.
Deed restriction then, yeah.
Yeah.
Right, I think if, and it would also depend on what level of incentive you gave folks. If you just said, all right, we'll waive your building permit fees, or we'll waive your tap fees or something like that. Like, you know, council doesn't like to waive tap fees, but you know, if you were to say something like that, or we'll relax the standards and let you build in the setbacks or have a taller height or a smaller minimum size or less parking or something like that, maybe you don't need a deed restriction because it's relatively small carrot that you're giving someone. But if we were to give, say, you know, hand someone $50,000 and say, go and build an ADU, I think in that case, you would say, all right, well, now it has to be rented to a local. Because now we've invested quite a lot in your property improvements and improving the property value to do it. Cause yeah, if you're spending money as a city to then have an illegal short-term rental, that would kind of defeat the purpose. I
Exactly,
think.
Well,
and that's
maybe-
exactly what would happen.
Well, maybe enforcement of illegal short-term rentals is its own point in this like discussion idea.
Right,
And I don't know how, but like, it's certainly an issue. I mean, there's only so many permits, but we all know there's more than 15. And so, I don't know, is there anything that can be done? I don't know, nobody has to have an answer right now, but I mean, they can be part of the discussion.
So when you do the deed restrictions, affordable housing, it's kind of like what we were just talking about, Summit County. You could build something, they buy it at this, they get help, you know, whatever, buying it, and then they can't turn around and sell it, like get a realtor sell it and make a huge profit. It has to stay in a deed restricted type sale too, so the next person that comes along that might be an employee of the city looking for decent housing could buy it the same way.
right,
Well, and that's where I saw a benefit, at least like a lot of the property owners too. I mean, able to improve a property that maybe someone wants to sell to someone in the city. And now it's deed restricted to just the city.
Well, I guess my question is, say there is a parcel of land, somebody wants to go in and build an apartment building. Let's call them condos because they're gonna sell them, not do apartments. They're deed restricted. How does the place that's building it, the people building it, the contractor, like Four Points, how are they getting paid when it's restricted at such a, well, AMI, I think people are gonna be shocked at what AMI, it's still gonna be probably $1,800 a month for a one-bedroom place. I mean, people need to realize that
right, it
just
depends on
because
what
it's
you-
affordable doesn't mean it's gonna be $900 a month.
No.
Well, yeah, right.
But how does the people that come in and wanna construct it and build it and stuff, how are they making any money?
Well, I think the potential ways to help them make it financially viable would be a couple of ways. One would be if the city subsidized development, let's say we owned, you know, I may have mentioned the parcel that's near the cemetery that the city is purchasing for senior housing, and it might be 50, 60 units of senior housing that would be capped at a certain rate. Like a easy way to reduce the cost of that development and keep it affordable would be to just say, okay, developer, here's the land that would cost you $1 billion otherwise. You can have it for free, but you have to
Okay.
operate it this way.
Okay.
That's correct.
Other folks like, you know, Rivers Ben's had huge amounts of subsidy, if you will, from
Right.
federal housing programs. And that's the other way folks do it. And then the final way would be potentially to make it cheaper for them to develop because you've relaxed standards or you've allowed for larger density, things like that. Things like reducing the property line for affordable projects from say 15 feet to 10 feet or something, because now you can fit an additional unit. Things like reducing the minimum size of a unit. So it's, you know, instead of requiring 700 square feet, you could do 500 square feet, and now you can fit an extra 5 units. And so now
So the contractor or the person that's financially doing this, costs are lowered with those types of things.
Yeah, costs have
Yeah.
gone up over the last
I
few
know,
decades
that's
so
what I
much
mean.
for developers. It's not all
Yeah.
developer grade, some of it for some developers, more than others. But a big part of it is that it just costs a lot more to develop a project than it used to, even adjusting for inflation because of strict regulations and
But
stuff.
that's what
So
I mean,
it's a
how
great
do they
approach.
make money? Because the cost of building this is.
Well, he was just saying we can address
Yeah.
lowering the cost.
I do think
Like
it's
the land
quite
and stuff.
difficult.
And
The
regulations.
planning literature and like case studies from various communities all around the country would say that you can make the standards as relaxed as possible. There's not a lot of developers who are willing to build a truly affordable, deed restricted workforce units unless they're forced to. And there are some developers, I even talked to a developer last week about Carlson, who just kind of called and said, hey, we're an affordable housing developer and we get financing through these 4 or 5 different ways, and it gets cobbled together and then make it, truly like a workforce housing project, and it pencils out because of the grants and the subsidies and
Okay.
the tax credits and stuff like that.
Gotcha.
But where communities see more success in getting affordable housing built, would be the community builds it themselves. And you find the funding to do it, or you require developers to figure it out by either paying a fee in lieu or requiring a certain amount to be affordable, in quotation marks. And, in the same way, also saying, well, here, we're requiring you to do 10% affordable, but we are going to allow those affordable units to be smaller, to have less setbacks, to have smaller parking standards, et cetera, to reduce your costs in these other ways that the city can control and stomach. So if you were wanting to see an really effective program, it would probably have to have some level of, if you're a big developer, you're required to do it, while also saying, but if you're like an existing property owner, or like you just have one unit, like here's some incentives as well that we paid for using these kind of required programs.
So it
that
sounds
makes a
like
lot
we
of
almost have more than one.
Well, and I think it could be a suite of options where you say, like, let's do both of these things and know that on its own, maybe none of them will be that effective. But if you have enough momentum moving forward and enough going on, maybe you see some real impacts. Like,
And if they're relatively small projects, you can jettison the ones that didn't work out too well, I guess, if you're taking that approach.
well, and you could, it's not that we don't have an extreme number of spaces where you can build a lot of density, like the Carlson Elementary School site is an obvious one. But otherwise, it's probably redevelopment, maybe of a mobile home park, or maybe of I don't know, there's a few single family homes in an area that's zoned for multifamily, maybe you see small developments, redevelopments.
Well, we had the
occur
one on
there.
the east end where, you guys remember, he wanted to build big 3 big apartment buildings. And we shot that down, yeah,
Right,
it was,
No elevator,
yeah, it was not a,
no, did not work.
there's probably higher density development in areas that could be appropriate, but it obviously have to come forward with a proposal that meets all of the regulations. Because you also don't want to create a scenario where now you're letting these affordable workforce units like slip in standards, and now people are living in substandard conditions,
That's what we were talking about.
studio apartment or something.
And on that exact point, I've been doing some research on this, and the idea of building affordable housing is great. It comes from a good place, and I'm a bleeding heart, so I like it. But historically in America, the way that houses have become affordable is that they're old, and housing, the apartments too, and all kinds of things. And like the most common way for affordable housing to be created is that new luxury housing is built over here, and now this is seen as old and not in style, and so it's can't sell for as much or rent for as much because it's out of style. And we haven't built enough housing for like decades.
Right.
And so just saying like, oh, we should just build more housing and let stuff age in doesn't really address the urgent need that some people have. But it is the main way that affordable housing has been made for all of American history.
That's interesting.
And so it's almost like we got to address both at the same time,
Sure.
because it's a problem that's been left unaddressed for a long time. So, projects that maybe didn't have as much or as affordable as you would have thought, still win, I think,
Right,
because it's more housing.
Increase the supply.
And people that can move out of more shady areas, like, or unstable situations people that can't afford them, they'll open up more affordable housing there.
Sure.
So I just think that's an important thing to
Yeah, that's true.
Well, we talk about like ways to force affordability.
Mhm.
It's good
There
to
are
do.
some natural ways of
Yeah.
doing so. Well, I do know,
They take
some of
time.
you may know Soda Creek Highlands, that development up on top of Pine Slope.
Yeah.
That there's a development that was approved for a approximately 45 single-family units in like 2008, 2009. And they came in a few years ago and tried to triple the density and do a bunch of like apartment complexes and things like that.
I was involved in all that. It was Bristol Cones Development, which was a really nice development. They went back and forth with Planning Commission for quite a few years. They
Yeah.
had curb and gutter and everything. I mean, it was great.
Wow.
And then it all went away, but then they re-upped how long they had to do it again. We extended it, and then it went away. And
Yeah.
then it was purchased by, we know who, and came to council. Gosh, was it right after COVID or right before COVID?
Yeah, in that time frame.
And he wanted to, I mean, build all these apartments and did the traffic study and everything. And then we shot it down,
Mhm.
and it's been silent still.
Well,
Has he
I was
approached you?
gonna give an update on that is
I was thinking about.
it was
that the other day.
determined that the initial proposal of the 45 units was still valid, if you will, I guess. And so they are actually coming in relatively sometime in the future with a subdivision improvements agreement that will have to go through all the review process and things like that for curb and gutter and development and all that, but it sounds like there's some traction. And so that gets to the point of, well, that could be up to 45 units that are single family homes.
Yeah, part of the pushback at the time, which to me, I thought it was a great project. We worked hard on that thing with the developer, Bristol Cones, and the engineer, what's his name? He lives up in Dumont. But they just on that rapid graph. Anyway, it was great, went through and stuff, and it was gonna be homes. And then everybody was, oh, they wanna build homes, they're gonna be $600,000 homes, $500,000 homes. And people were angry about it, pissed off about it. And now you're sitting here looking at everything's a $500,000, $6,000 home. So had it moved forward, oh my gosh, it would have been great, but
Right.
people were thinking, oh, it's just gonna become a bedroom community. People from Denver, to me, it doesn't matter.
Sure. Yeah.
But then when the other developer came in and wanted to do apartments and stuff, we got a lot of pushback from the homeowners.
Right,
up
yeah,
there.
that's a very different expectation,
Yeah.
but I think
Well, and the traffic,
the original proposal of just homes at the 40-ish
Yep.
level, if the proposal meets all the requirements for the subdivision improvements,
Yep.
then it
It
could go
could.
forward, and now it might be $1 million homes,
Yeah.
not
it's gonna
$600,000
be,
homes, but it gets to Kent's point of it's like still more supply that maybe reduces the,
It'll make the houses in town look like maybe they're not quite worth what people dream they can get for them, is my thought. And I don't know, no one has a crystal ball, but it just shouldn't be let perfect be the enemy of good when there's an urgent crisis.
there's a lot that can be done. Like every positive is still a win, no matter how small, I suppose. So I guess, does anyone have any direction, I suppose, like, should I bring this on kind of as is to council and say, like, here's a bunch of ideas? Are there any ideas that are maybe not so good, or, maybe do I wanna dig deeper onto some of these and not others and bring it back next month?
I think it's a tough one, because it's hard to,
Yeah,
there's different options in not knowing enough about it.
right.
When you look at Riverbend, how many vacancies is there? Is
There-
that place full?
Yeah, it's full and they're
Oh, no,
listed
no,
all the
it's-
time, so
yeah.
it's, it's
Is
like, they,
Oh, yeah.
I heard in a
Oh,
meeting
yeah.
relatively recently that
I always
Yeah.
see an ad for it.
they have like 4 tiers of rental. The first is like,
Yeah.
or no, I'm thinking of the senior housing, sorry, but Riverbend, the senior housing is so backed up in need of senior housing that there's like a 2-year plus wait list, but
I,
Riverbend, I don't think there's much vacancy. Townwide, the vacancy rate is like less than 5%.
yeah,
You have to have some, I wonder what a healthy.
we get
vacancy
people
rate
that
is.
check on it all the time, and nobody qualifies for it at Riverbend. And because
That's
they
tough.
make too much. And then the other thing is, so it makes you think, well, who is renting there? Are they keeping filled up? Because you're taking a person making $20 an hour and they can't live there
I
because
think
they're
they
making too
also
much.
have some kind of tiers and like maybe
Mhm.
the apartments available for that kind of people, they are for.
Like I
They
said,
have,
we're
they have
not,
trouble at the lower tiers, and I know this, I have friends that live there, that were in the lower tiers. They have trouble there because, like you said, somebody makes too much for the lower tier. And so that kind of forces them to accept more unstable, people with more unstable income. And then they run into trouble paying rent on time,
Right.
you know, and that's maybe an example of a good swing and a miss, just for that one. Maybe the tier level is just not quite right, I don't know.
but you're saying that you're thinking it's full all the time.
Well, yeah, but they're having trouble at that lowest tier, because there's a lot of turnover, is what I mean.
At that lowest tier, if you don't have some sort of government stuff like Section 8 housing or vouchers of some kind, it can be really difficult to keep people in there if you are jumping between jobs or it's like
Yeah.
transients with jobs and things like that.
So have we looked at being able to build another place like that then? Why not
I think,
use programs like that again? Because it didn't really cost the city anything.
right, I think we'd certainly be open to that. I don't know that the city has much available space at the
Yeah.
moment, like us, because we just had at the last work session for council, the city's working with a firm who is doing some kind of conceptual design on the few parcels the city does own in the city limits that have easy access to water. There's like this little triangular parcel right adjacent to the 4 Points project. There's the senior housing project, which could be quite a large project. And then there's, um,
I knew that.
but,
Anyway, we're sorry.
oh,
We're not-
We know too much.
You guys had to spread the information here.
Actually, where the gas was, where the city bought that, that would have been a great place
oh,
to
where
put.
they're like PDs going in.
No,
or-
not the, yeah, when are they going in there? They've been, anyway.
They don't
No,
have
the
that.
one across from the fire station though. Where the storage unit thing is.
Yeah. Oh, right, that's
Yeah.
gonna be, that is earmarked for parking, yeah,
Yeah,
that's true,
which
that would
should-
be large enough. for-
Cause I had somebody that came and looked at it and was working with. Actually, yeah, before you started, because they were gonna come in and do something, but there was nothing like this in place to
Right,
make them be able to do it. So it doesn't have to just be city property. This applies to
yeah, it
any
would be
developer, right?
any developer on any parcel, and some of them could be, you know, if it was the ADU thing, it could be every single person who owns a house in town could benefit from it, potentially. I think some of them are much larger lifts, you know, if we were like trying to do, it'd be easy to install a program where we say, all right, we'll pay for deed restriction to a local property owner who wants to buy a house for the first time. Like, it'd be easy to set that up, difficult to fund. I think putting together a specific inclusionary housing regulation that's built out as it would need to be is probably a heavier lift, but once it's in place, it would cost the city very little. Because it's just a requirement that the property owner, the developer do. Like,
Which one
That's
is
in
that?
relation to the code, the
That-
section that you said earlier, right?
Yeah, that would be like, because we have that section that's about inclusionary zoning, inclusionary housing. So if we were to build that out and say, okay, well, here's the program, here's all the details on it, this is the percentage that needs to be done for like the commercial project, you know, that's creating jobs, and this is the percentage for a small development and a large development, and this is your fee and lieu costs and all of that. And then here's the relaxed standards for those affordable units. That would probably take some time to put together and get approved and through the system and all that. But it's something that, yeah, would cost us relatively low amount of money because it's just a requirement that now the developer has to.
Well, it sounds like we definitely should move forward on something like that.
Well, it sounds like, to me, there's a whole bunch of ideas, and to your point, it's hard to keep them all in your head.
Yeah.
It seems like some way of doing a minimal amount of research on all of them to kind of organize them into like, what are maybe highly effective, what we think wouldn't be, what are heavy lifts, and
Which
what
one would be
what are
the
easy,
easiest? Yeah.
you know? And then maybe kind of be able to have a kind of, right, here's a bunch of easy wins, you know, that maybe aren't big, but we can do quick.
Yeah.
And here's some bigger ones, which ones do we want to tackle? But that can be a decent amount of work, even just organizing it like that. So it might be nice to, you know the council isn't just, I don't know if the city staff does that or if we do that, or it'd be nice to know that the council isn't just gonna think we waste our time wherever we work.
Well, I was just gonna point out that once we get more into this discussion, we do it in a work session with the city council.
100%.
Because there's no sense sitting here, us
Yeah.
figuring something out, and then they go, what about this, what about this, where it could be discussed in a work session.
I think that's a good idea. I was also going to, after this meeting or after a next meeting, if I wanted to like say, organize things and say, here's the hardest ones, here's the easiest ones, here's the ones with the most benefit and the least benefit. You know, like that chart that you might see that's like most benefit, most work, least benefit, most work, you know, kind of tier it that way. Then I was definitely thinking, present that to council as well and say, hey, we've started this work because several council members have said, like the mayor has said, we need to work on this, you know, so then saying, well, we've had a meeting or maybe 2 sessions to talk about this at planning commission, based on direction from council and planning commission. Here's what we've addressed as like the 3 things that are, or here's all the things that are easy or hard, but have a good impact, because it's probably not worth doing the ones that are, maybe it's worth doing the one that's easy, but doesn't have a lot of impact, but it doesn't make any
It's
sense
easy
to do
enough.
ones that are hard, but low impact. So, so I could work for the next month or so to put together a chart like that, if that would be helpful. Or if you want me to just move forward to council first, I could do it either way.
I think that'll be really helpful.
I think it would really grease the wheels on the discussion with council.
Yeah.
And then it gives them something solid to present to them in the sense of doing that preliminary work, and now let's do a work session
Yeah,
together.
and we're not just handing them a bunch of ideas and say, hey, figure it out.
Right,
Even though you want to.
Well, you know.
yeah. Okay, well, 7:30, so I think, yeah, I can put more together. I just wanted to get a preliminary talk going, so that way next month I'll have some more detail and maybe folks will have some, you know, something to pop up in the next month and you say, wow, what a fantastic idea, let's add that or something like that.
I got a couple of those I thought of just during this, I'll make it super quick, sorry, but just
Sure.
I mentioned, or we mentioned the enforcement of illegal short-term rentals. I have no idea how possible that is, but just to, you know, and then, you know, that you had a question about like, well, how do the developers get paid? How do the contractors get paid and all this stuff? And, you know, Habitat for Humanity figures it out. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel. Maybe there's some way that the city can work with them directly,
Right.
provide funding, support, something, to make it easier.
Yeah, because I think they are interested in doing more projects.
They definitely are. I was chatting with the general contractor up there, and I mean, the whole reason that they're only doing 4 instead of 8 to begin with, they'll do the other 4
Yeah,
up at that project on Virginia is just because of lack of funding. It's because their bank wouldn't give them a big enough loan. And so I don't know if there's anything the city could ever do about that, but maybe, you know, and there's gotta be other things that could be done. They have a heck of a time hiring people up in the mountains too. I mean, you know, they have challenges and they've already figured out they have challenges that government is uniquely able to help with, and they've already figured out a lot of the issues that you were talking about.
Let's just go, we have around.
Yeah, why reinvent the
Collaborate,
wheel?
exactly.
right. Well, and we are it's like kind of we're in an interesting space geographically,
Definitely.
because there's a huge housing need both directions of us as well. That's probably, you know, the unaffordability in either direction scores higher probably than it is here in a relative per capita sense. You know, the average home price in Summit County is over $2 million.
How many of the units, how many of those are the new ones in Georgetown? Cause that's gonna,
Yeah,
I mean, does anyone know?
I don't know how many units are in this phase, but it's quite a lot.
Oh, it's a lot.
I could get that data pretty easily, but that is something else, that is another thing where I think we are regional enough that
Mhm.
that will also help, because, you know, I know at least like one of Kelsey, who's our court clerk, lives in that area, you know, and,
They're getting a lot of Summit County people too. Because
yeah,
it's an easy commute from Georgetown to
right.
Silver.
On the worst days, yeah.
Yeah.
Having to go through the tunnel on the
Snowstorm.
middle of the snowstorm is quite bad, but
Yeah.
I mean, it's
You're
it's
good.
definitely true that like city-owned properties up there at a deed restriction are more expensive than like when I bought a house here. Like the house here,
In some-
market rate was cheaper than anything I could have bought that was deed restricted anywhere in Summit County, even like a 400 square foot studio apartment with $500 a month in HOA fees. So
We're glad you landed here.
it's something that we can gladly, I think we can address it. Because we're not quite at that same level of dire need, it's something maybe we can have a bigger impact more quickly because we're kind of addressing it before it's this huge explosion from everywhere else.
That's a good point, because that'll happen.
Well, you know,
I
I was
mean,
willing to
exactly.
commute for like a year up the hill from here, so people will definitely do that. So
We have employees that. commute from Denver.
I knew someone who commuted to Breckenridge every day
That's a long
from
haul.
Eagle,
Yeah.
Yeah,
an hour and a half, or beyond Eagle, actually.
Okay, so you feel like you have enough direction on that?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I will plan to put together a more rigorous discussion with like an actual, I will create a chart. I think it will be quite illustrative of hopefully where maybe we can go from there and get it moving in the council. Because I know we're not reinventing the wheel, because there's a lot of places all over the country that are doing
yeah, it's a problem.
similar things. It's kind of a priority countrywide.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Well, a lot of places have been doing it for a lot longer too, right?
True.
Coming from Austin, they were doing affordable housing decades ago.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Right,
true.
and so like, there's just different places that we can look and compare
You
to.
can borrow heavily from what works elsewhere.
Problem.
Does everybody still want these delivered, or are they good with?
Ooh, good point. I'm good
I
with the
do.
electronic. Okay.
If anyone does want to go to, so I know like council, 2 of the 7 get hand like paper copies, but if anyone doesn't want them, we can just eliminate.
Well, I
a few
just
of
think,
those
I know,
paper
I look
copies.
at my ring and my ring goes off and
I
I
don't
look back and, oh, Dylan was just at that house.
I can hit mine down to the bottom because ours is treacherous going up the stairs, so I don't need it delivered. I'll just do it electronically.
Yeah, electronic as well.
Me too, because I want to print it again.
I'm fine electronics.
I'm happy to deliver.
Nice to
Nice
meet you.
It's nice to write it.
So-
Well, and the other thing we could do certainly is say, hey, anyone want, I will certainly still deliver it to you, Chuck. But if anyone says, hey, actually, I do want this, like certainly we'll still print plans.
Mhm.
And we can either just have them here for folks to pick up. Or, you know, if someone says, I don't need paper at all, then, you know, we can just have them here for at the meeting or something.
Yeah, definitely the big plans are helpful, I agree, but maybe not always.
And if they could be available like a couple days before, so we can look at them if we want to.
Yeah, I think if we do go to a hybrid approach where not everyone gets a paper copy, we will trial it in November. We will still have the packet all prepared Thursday afternoon, so, and you'd have Friday and then Monday, Tuesday, I guess, if that's enough time to like come in and grab a copy or something, or just to reach out to me and say, hey, I'd like this, to see this.
I'm willing to
Too much
try it.
work for you.
No, that's
Which-
fine. I mean, it would create slightly less work
Oh,
because
yeah.
now Wonder wouldn't be printing out
Yeah.
6, 7 packets. Wonder would also not be,
Then he's running all over town. Yeah.
yeah, wouldn't have to run all over
He's
town.
gonna talk to you one day. I don't wanna scare
Well,
him.
I never know who's there and who's not, you know.
There's never anyone.
I will say, this past Thursday, I rode my bike to Dylan's house.
Oh,
So it's got a
You
nice
rode
little-
all the way up there, all the way up to hers?
Mhm.
Dang. Are you on an electric bike?
No,
Whoa.
So nice.
I used to be able to ride
it
it,
was,
but I
it was
wouldn't.
about 5 miles, so.
It's not that big.
That's
Yeah,
good.
up and
So
then,
have you rode the bike trail up?
Yes.
How long does it take you?
I don't know the time. I went up with the Tacoma people and Chief, police Nate,
Nice.
just before they opened to the public to kind of do like a.
And you rode it the whole way up?
It was pretty good. I
Our guys
think
are riding.
we stopped a few times to look at stuff and talk about signs and things like that, but, it's, if you do just the one loop, because there's like maybe a mile loop or so that's off to the side connected, if you just do the full up and down, it's like 7 miles.
I have one guy, he can make it up from the bottom in 40 minutes. It's like, because I guess that's pretty hardcore, I don't know.
On a,
I've hiked it a bunch, I've never ridden a bike.
yeah, I ran up it once.
My dog runs up.
Yeah.
It's so cool to see the excitement of people.
It's awesome.
It really is.
News again,
Nick,
my
you do it, I do it.
my daughter, brought
Wipe
it
up
in
it.
and said.
I'm okay.
I knew he was gonna say that, that's why I did it. That's why I chose it.
Oh.
We can call an Uber to the top.
That was pretty.
How about we ride to the top in a car and you ride your bikes down?
Too dangerous.
No, it's funny.
Okay.
Okay, are we done?
Yeah, no, this is great. Thank you all for your
Thank you so
time.
much.
I know you're taking off tomorrow too, right?
I am out of the office on Friday, but
Oh, I thought you were leaving tomorrow, so,
I'm taking a flight in the evening tomorrow.
okay. And then, are you going to not where all this flooding and stuff has been, has it?
No,
Oh,
no,
you're
no.
doing Memphis area, right?
Yes, they're fine. It's supposed to be sunny and 80 degrees every day.
I know, I bet it is incredible.
All right, well.